My journey through Judaism is a very interesting one because it brought me closer to Islam, my own faith. And I felt that the Islamic community did not understand a lot about Jewish history, what had happened to the Jews, and the focus was only on Israel in 1948. So I took it upon myself to sort of journey through the issues and create some positive and optimistic stories about Muslims in the Holocaust. I do a lot of work at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and through that I found a lot of archived material of Muslims, and Arabs especially, in internment camps with Jews. And I thought that was fascinating. I had never heard of that. And one of the things that I talk about in the article on the Holocaust and the Muslims is how there were Muslims and Jews in a camp with Christians, and how the officer there, who was a Vichy officer, and these camps were really devised by the Vichy government under the Nazi regime, wanted to put together the Arabs and Jews because he was convinced they were going to kill each other. And there's a whole story in a memoir I found that actually contradicts that completely, where it says the Arabs and the Jews helped each other, not just like friends, but like brothers. And it was an amazing piece of information. There are many, many stories that are still untold about the Holocaust and Muslims' role in the Holocaust in terms of positive stories, stories of optimism, stories of rescue. Faribar's Mokhtari wrote a book called Iranian Schindler. It's a fascinating book looking at how a man in Iran rescued hundreds of Jewish Iranians by proving that they were under a Mosaic law. So what he tried to do was change the idea that they were Semitic, that they were actually Mosaic, people of Moses, but not necessarily Semitic. And the way that he did this kind of research and work was amazing. And he convinced the Nazis that hundreds of Jewish Iranians could be freed. The Holocaust is a very sensitive topic. I mean, right now we are in 2014. Gaza is being attacked by Israel. Israel is being attacked by Hamas. The language right now of anti-Semitism is very disturbing. This is a very challenging road that I've taken. The Holocaust is sensitive to me because it was such a colossal event. I believe, as a scholar and in terms of an ethical Muslim, that if we don't speak out for one another, then we can't speak for our own community. And so for me, these kinds of works, these stories of rescue, whether from Iran or whether from Tunisia, whether from even Egypt, whether from Albania, are very important because it links the humanity of Jews and Muslims. And it kind of erodes the idea that we are other. To speak up for one another, to rescue one another, even if one is not related or is from the same faith, is extremely important work today.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And my guest today is Dr Mehnaz Afridi. Is very interesting indeed, because she comes to this from a very unique perspective. She's Muslim, and she has been passionate about understanding the Shoah and showing the work that Muslims did to try and help their Jewish neighbor during World War II. Shalom, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you so much, Dr. Honan, Mary, for having me here.
You're very
welcome. I just want to say a little bit about where I work. I work at Manhattan College, which is a Lasallian Catholic college, and I direct the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center. I'm just on a committee for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum.
Yeah.
And I also teach. I'm an associate professor. I teach Islam, and I teach the Holocaust and other genocide studies. So thank you so much for having me here.
You're most welcome. It's just really interesting because I was very conscious of, especially in Morocco, and that the amount of and it's not very well known, the amount of Muslims who actually went out of their way and hid their Jewish neighbors and who had been their friends prior to the Nazis' arrival, and it's not very well known. And I suppose we are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism were part of the three Abrahamic religions. So we do have, we certainly should have a lot in common with each other, more than we have differences. How did you? I know you came to it when you went to Germany on a trip, and you actually ended up at Auschwitz, and that's where you had your epiphany, if you like, and that's how your direction in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me as a Muslim Pakistani girl growing up in Western Europe, I was born in Pakistan, and I was always with Jews and Christians and Hindus. My parents were very open to other religions, but I was brought up as a Muslim. I practice Islam, I still do. I still love my religion. And then when I moved to Dubai, which is, Middle East, UAE, is when I started to feel, wow, what happened to Jews? There's no Jewish people here. And then in our textbooks at school, they would erase the word Israel and Jew from the book. So I got very curious as a child.
Yeah.
And then when I moved to New York, it was predominantly Jewish American, our neighborhood in Scarsdale. And there I was kind of not treated very well by the Jews. And I was like, what's going on here? And I felt like there was something that I was missing.
Yeah.
Something I didn't understand. I mean, I knew kind of in black and white photographs in Europe what the Holocaust was, but never in depth. And then I went to, I had a teaching assistantship, and you get put in different classes, and I ended up being in Dr. Alan Berger's class where he taught the Holocaust. And the way that I learned it then in depth just blew my mind away. And I thought, I don't think the Muslim world has any knowledge of this. And I know that when I ask questions, people said, oh, it's political. We don't hate the Jews, but we don't agree with Israel. And it became a contradiction in my mind. So I started to explore. And then when I went to Dachau, it was the first time I really wrote about it.
Yeah.
Which became a book.
I actually haven't been to Dachau or to Auschwitz, but I'm reluctant to go because I'm afraid to go on my own, because I'm afraid, I suppose, of the impact it will have on me. But I know that my book was bought by a Facebook friend of mine who's living in Pakistan, and he said to me that he's quite proud of the fact that he's probably the only one in Pakistan with a Holocaust book, which it's interesting that somebody who came from your background of no knowledge about it, and it all been shrouded more or less in secrecy in the country, and suddenly this is your chosen career. This is your life. It's more than a career. It's a lifestyle for you.
It is. And as a Muslim, I think of the ethical duty that we have as Muslims is to speak about the truth, and to speak about justice, and to acknowledge human suffering. And this is really my journey. Actually, currently now I'm writing a book on the wounded Muslim trauma and memory. And I'm talking about also, how does Islam deal with also Muslim genocides, and how do we talk about that openly?
Yeah.
And has Islam become a healing place? So I think for me, the journey is not, I'm not upset with Islam. I just want to educate people, and I want to educate them so that they can try and build bridges, not just between Jews and Muslims, but even today, when I teach my classes, I talk about Black Americans and white Americans, and how to acknowledge the
breaking barriers.
How to acknowledge the painful past, and start to acknowledge that we have different moments of suffering, different moments of oppression, but it's not whose suffering is more important or more severe. And so that's how I came to build this.
I suppose it's understanding that if anything, we are connected through suffering, and through suffering at somebody else's hands, and through the suffering that we have created ourselves down through generations, because we are definitely we definitely have as much in common as we have differences, but it's to try and break down those barriers and understand those those similarities. That's an interesting journey for you. What way do you teach it in the class now? Is it mostly all through texts? Is it through oral testimony? Is it through, like what I was teaching, through creativity? I was teaching children who are third level students who were hoping to go on to be primary teachers, and how they were going to teach it in their class. And they used all sorts of methods like clay and wire, and they used PowerPoints, and we ended up having to do a lot of it through Zoom and through online because of COVID locking us down. But everything was open to them. They could have used fabric, they could have used textiles, they could have used carpet, they could have used anything to either draw or write, or everything. Any form of creativity was open to them to explore the subject of the Holocaust through age appropriate means. Is that it? How do you do it?
So I have mainly undergraduates in my class, and I mean, you know, your class sounds amazing to me, and all the tools and materials you use. But you know, I do a mix of history, religious texts, and I look at testimony. We watch videos, we watch old videos and analyze photographs. And in this class, I'm also doing digital humanities. So I have them go out and do raw research and look at data and patterns from 1800s all the way to today. They can choose whatever they want to do. It has to be about anti-Semitism, or it could even be about Islamophobia, or it could be about Jewish and Muslim testimony during the Holocaust. So we try in very different ways to do that. And I'm both on campus, but I also have students online during COVID.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge, but I feel that it's very important for students to hear a Muslim kind of say, look, you know, there's anti-Semitism in my community and I want to do something about it. And I think that they're turned around when they also hear that a Muslim is actually a Holocaust scholar. And what does that mean? So, and it's not as if I don't address other genocides. My new book is about Muslims and genocide. And I've done work in, you know, Bosnia. But I'm a believer that if we are going to change relationships between either faiths or races, we have to speak up for one another. And I do come from a religious background of Islam, which says, you know, we are all equal. We're all created equally. And God has challenged us in our life because of difference. So if we were all created the same, there would be no challenge. So this is a challenge that we all have.
But in a sense, isn't that really, I know it's probably philosophical, but isn't that what connects us, is the fact that we are different. I'm different from you, you're different from me. And it's that sense of difference that we're all united by. And if we can, you know, this idea that we're all the same here and you're different, that's not true, because even within us, we're all different. So it's actually it's the fact that we're all fundamentally different from even our own social group, our own religious group, from each other, that we're also different from everyone else. And that, right. And if we can break down that idea of difference, we'll be able to find self.
Exactly. I mean, I teach this little essay. It's actually a book. It's by Amin Malouf. He's Lebanese. He speaks Arabic. He's a Christian background. And this whole book is, it's called In the Name of Identity, Violence of the Need to Belong. And why I teach it to freshmen, they're just coming to school, is I have them question this precise concept. So if you're Catholic, it doesn't mean you're all the same. If you're Muslim, it's not the same. And he breaks down these barriers and shows us that the concept of purity and origin is a mythology that we created because we are threatened by the other. So when they start to learn, and then I have them do this exercise where I have them look at their own backgrounds, A lot of them are Irish, actually, because it's Manhattan
Yeah, yeah.
College. But they start to discover, oh my God, my grandparents were immigrants and they came just like the Guatemalans, or they just came like the Muslim immigrants. And so there's that connection being made in the first kind of religious, and this is a world religious course.
Yes.
And so when I
Yeah,
get to
that was what
religion,
my course was as well, world
yeah,
religions, religion and belief.
right.
Because we looked at atheism as well as a belief structure, and then human creativity, which was
But, yeah.
it's the only college it's done in, and they commented on it, the examiners, for the final exams, on how well it had gone. Do you know? Because some people are not academic, but they can relate to a subject more visually and more creatively, either through photography or through painting. One girl even came up with the idea of using food to look at Islam, and she was looking at Islam, and she was looking at food, and she was actually, and another girl was going to look at pastry and make flowers, or make these flowers, and she was going to get everybody to paint it a different color to show that, okay, we're all different nationalities, different religions, but we all make up this beautiful bouquet of flowers when
Mm-hmm.
you're put together. And they're just simple concepts, but they get children understanding that difference can be one when it's put together,
Mm-hmm.
can be
Yeah.
equality, and that's, there's, or drama. That's another aspect. I had some Irish dancers in my class, who used music. They were also musicians, so they used music to look at religion,
Wow. Yeah.
and they used music to look at to look at the Jewish culture through music. They were fascinated with the call to prayer, the music in the background while they were working. I was playing the call to prayer, and it was so meditative. They had
Mm-hmm.
never heard it before. How much do you think that the barriers between, say, Islam and Judaism, and even Christianity in a sense, is to do with ignorance? And when I say ignorance, I don't mean stupid, but lack of knowledge or lack of awareness. You weren't brought up with a knowledge of Judaism. It was all basically whitewashed out of your schools. So your first immersion in it was when you moved to America, if you like, and were put into the middle of a Jewish community.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we have to realize in that both Europe and the United States is not about teaching religion, because they're basically secular if you're in a public school. And then if you are in a private school, it comes under social studies or history. So I think it is ignorance, but it's also about how we remember each other's traditions. So we hold on to sort of like, the Crusades is a big memory for Jews and Muslims. And then for the Western world, this, act of terrorism is a big thing. Colonialism is a big thing for Muslims. So I think memory plays a lot of role in how we create communities that are separate from other communities. And that goes very much for religion. So I think that it's ignorance, but it's also how we remember each other's tradition, what we do with that. And so when we think of the threat of Christianity, that kind of sustains if we don't break that threat and say, look, things are different. That was a historical period. Now things have moved. Or look at the commonalities we have between Christians and Muslims, which are plenty. You look at sacred texts and you ask yourself, oh, I can't believe that, this is shared in the Quran and the Gospels.
I mean, our lady, Mary is in the Quran.
Yes.
She's the mother of God for us. Do you know?
Yes.
And in Judaism, she would be Miriam. And
Yes.
It's just, we have so much. We all three of us believe in Abraham. Do you know we are three Abrahamic religions, so we should have a lot more in common than
Well, I was
we're
with,
like three brothers, I think,
yeah,
that don't get on most of the time because
or sisters,
or three sisters that
yeah,
don't get on.
yeah.
Mo-
But I mean, I think one of the things we have to realize is that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam historically came from the Middle East. You know, I mean, it's funny how we've created this barrier of Eastern and Western, that West is only Christian and Eastern is something else. And I think that is something we need to deconstruct, is we are really global. I mean, even more today under COVID, where we can connect with anybody we want. You're in Ireland, I'm in New York, right? I mean, so this is part of the connection, but we can also talk on the same level, even though we don't even know each other. Or
No.
maybe, you know, we don't have the same culture, or I'm Americanized and Europeanized, but also Pakistani and Muslim. So there's all of these identities that have transformed the way we think about religion. And we have pushed it away as being secularized, but we haven't understood why it's been pushed away.
How important do you think, especially now, during COVID, that religion is in people's lives? And I don't, and by religion I don't mean how should I say it? How important do you think faith is, and having a belief structure is, and how important do you think it is in schools? Do you think it should be completely, schools should be secular and should be and should sever any references to religion, and or do you think religion is important in schools? Because I fundamentally believe in history being one of the most important subjects to be taught, because if you can't look to the past, you haven't a hope of and when we look at America at the moment, and you see people tearing down statues, and you think, I can understand that they're angry with who's been or who's been memorialized, if you like, or trying to ban books. You've got to learn from the past, not try to hide it and get rid of it. And I think I feel religion has its place in schools, where you can actually discuss and get a dialogue opening, because if you leave it out of the schools, the only chance you have of getting to know somebody who's Muslim, somebody who's Hindu, somebody who's Baha'i or is Muslim or Jewish, is through dialogue and through being in school with people who are of those religious beliefs. What do you feel?
Well, you know, I don't think secularism is totally bad, and I know the reasons why it came about. But I think that you can teach I mean, I'm a religious studies person. I have a PhD in religious studies and Islamic studies, right? So I'm a professor who teaches religion. But I think you have to be very careful about how you teach religion, right? So one is you either teach it objectively, like you're saying, with the history, with the facts, with having dialogue, with bringing in different nuances. And the other problematic way is proselytization.
Yeah.
Right? So you're standing there as a Muslim saying, you know, my religion is the best, or a Christian saying that, or Jews. And I think that's where people are weary about religion.
Yeah.
And all they hear are these religious figures in pulpits. They don't really hear religious study scholars as much. So
No.
I think that is something very important. I'll give you a story. I went to Berlin a few times to do some work, and one of the times I was at a high school, the Goethe Institute High School, where I gave a talk for a teacher that I know there. He's German, and he wanted me to come to class because he had Jewish, Christian, Muslim kids in that class. And when I had this conversation, they were lovely. They basically said that all they knew about Jews was the Holocaust. This is in Germany.
Yeah.
And all they knew about Muslims was terrorism. They had never visited a synagogue. They had never visited a mosque. They had never visited a church. And so they just had this awful, extreme image of them each other. And they said, we wish as a school we could go and have trips to religious institutions and learn more, but we're not allowed to. So you have to create a balance in terms of what you offer people to think about. It doesn't mean you ignore the extremism or the depictions. I think stereotypes are useful because you have to say, okay, where are these coming from? How do we have these stereotypes? What's the history of this stereotype? How do we think about this stereotype? I mean, there's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. So do you think all of them are extremists? And that's how you work with students and get them to transform.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. But you know, I mean, I think that's fundamentally right. It's how you actually approach the subject of education and how you actually teach it. I mean, as I say, with Mary Immaculate here in Limerick, it is a very good way of actually. I mean, some students may not have learned it. We learned world religions from sixth class in primary, the last class in primary, all the way through secondary school. So they would have a good understanding of there being a Holocaust and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But other religions, I mean, they looked at me at the very start, they'd never heard of Baha'i, they'd kind of heard of Buddhism and Hinduism and Quakerism. They had never heard of Quakers. And it was through bringing them out and showing them a Quaker prayer house, getting them, some of them chose to research. I got them in contact with Quakers who actually sat down and talked to them, and they were able to interview that person, and they were able to form by actually speaking to a human being who was a member rather than looking at a book and learning it off rote. They were speaking to a human being. I was able to connect them with Muslim cleric, and I was able to give them as much information as I had on Judaism and the Holocaust and that. So they were able to inform themselves through a creative way, and where they didn't feel bombarded by information, or they didn't feel as if they were being indoctrinated by somebody else's view. And I think that's a wonderful approach to it. How does your own community feel about having a Muslim scholar within their own little group who's a Muslim scholar on Judaism, or if you like, the Holocaust?
You know, I think, when my book came out, I was pleasantly surprised that Muslims felt like it was a book that was talking about justice and ethics. It's not a political book. It's it's an honest book, right? It's honesty. And it wasn't like I was angry at Muslims. I wasn't angry at Islam. And I think that they find my work to be interesting and perplexing at the same time. And I think the problem would always be, in terms of me, is, okay, so what about Palestine, right? I mean, that's always the question in the room, or what about Israel and Palestine? And I can also answer those questions because I believe in the state of Israel, but also believe in a state for Palestinians.
That's the way I am.
I don't believe in the destruction of the state of Israel or the destruction of the people of Palestine. And I think Israel has some very terrible policies that we have all spoken up against. So I think and it's also not my place to constantly politicize this relationship.
Yeah.
And it's also very important because once you politicize this, then you can't hear about the Holocaust and you can't hear about colonization. It doesn't mean that I don't want to address it or talk about it. And so some people will get upset that I'm not focusing on the Nakba or Palestine. But there's a book out called The Holocaust and the Nakba, actually, that discusses both. But I can't really compare the two. I think they're two totally different things.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, I find in many cases people use the phrase, "Oh, you know, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just anti-Israel." And for me, it's one and the same, because in many cases
Yeah.
some people who are anti-Israel are anti-Jewish, and they hold Israel to a completely different standard than they would any other country. And if Israel is to be held at a completely different standard than other atrocities all over the world, like Bosnia Herzegovina, Srebrenica, all of that, then there's something fundamentally deeper than the actual country. It's got to be the people that run the country, or the people who live in the country. So, and I do believe, it's my personal view, I believe in the state of Israel like you, but I also believe in peace for the Palestinian people.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know?
yeah, of course. And I think it's a big issue here in the United States. So there are many, many different political views on that. And then if you criticize Israel, then you are automatically anti-Semitic. But it's how you criticize it,
Yeah,
Israel. And I think that's a very important thing, or how you talk about Zionism, because most of us, especially Muslims, are not educated about what Zionism is. And they use it alternatively, like it's some ideology that's very negative, but actually
yeah,
has a very, very important theological history and cultural history and political history and
mm,
secular history. And so I always say, look, you need to be educated to use these terms in the public forum. And so therefore, you have these terms like Zionism that are used like Nazism, and that's terrible.
I
It's
know.
it's just like, oh my God, no. And they don't even know. They're not conscious of that. But that's the problem. If you are going to talk about a group of people, whether it's Jews or Muslims or Israelis or Palestinians or Americans, you have to be conscious and ethical about what you are saying in the public domain.
Absolutely.
You have to be very conscious about how it impacts people and what people's sensitivities are. And so I find myself kind of isolated in that way, because I think that a lot of people are very prone to point the finger at certain governments or groups of people. Whereas I take my time to think about, well, what does this mean for that community? What don't I know? Where's my research on this? And I
Yeah.
think I think we kind of expect people to do that kind of research. That's why, they have hopefully scholars, but not political pundits who like to spout out things, and they become very popular
I
because
think
they're feeding in.
I think it's trying to, and I know it's a cliche, but trying to step into the other person's shoe. I mean, I grew up, as I said to you before we started, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish background. God knows what else I have if I was to do a genealogical tree or
Mhm.
anything like that. But I think the one thing, and English and Irish, my father was English, my mother was Irish. So I grew up with a healthy understanding of difference, that not everybody was the same. My father was very dark, my mother was blonde. So I was always conscious of difference, and respect for difference. And I think it's important that we're able to step into the other person's shoes, if only to try and understand them. We're never going to understand their suffering unless we um, experience it ourselves. And you and I both know from Holocaust survivors, you could have 10 people in a room who've all survived the Holocaust. Every single one of them might have gone through the same suffering, but they've all responded to it differently,
Mhm.
or it's meant a different thing. Some may try to forget it, others may never be able to forget.
Mhm.
They may be destined to remember for the rest of their lives. Everyone's different, but it's to try and take that step to understanding what life is like for my Muslim friend, or my Jewish friend, or my Catholic friend, Christian friend. Do you know?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think it's not about understanding. I don't think I could understand ever what went on in the Holocaust as a person.
No.
Um, but acknowledging is different, and accepting that narrative is a different thing. I'd say to Jewish audiences that colonization in every Muslim country was a very tough thing. It really took away culture, religion,
Yeah.
language, customs, and then when there was the independence of these states, there was a real chaos and dictatorships.
There was a chasm.
Yeah, and then I think Muslim countries are still dealing with this identity. And the thing that they had was Islam. But what kind of Islam? They haven't figured out. It's like I think even in Pakistan, where I think the government is very open in terms of being Muslim, but there's still this extremist strand that wants to say, no, we don't want to have anything to do with the West. And I want to say, well, it's not separate, right? We can't take away our colonial experience. We can't take away that there were Catholic schools and missionaries all over Asia and Africa. We can't take away that history. So how do we live with that history, acknowledge that history, and still have peace, and be able to practice your religion or not? So, I mean, these are really large questions that I think a lot of Muslim countries are asking. This is why the Arab Spring went on for so long. Some of it successful, some of it not. But I think we need to let history kind of move, because these are very newly formed independent countries. We're talking about 40s, 50s, and 60s. So this is a whole new wave that's going to go on.
It's the same for ourselves. I'm not sure if you understand the Irish history.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same for us here. I mean, we've been a colonized people for the bones of 600 years. And since 1939, we just got our independence. And it's like every country, when it gains independence, it takes a long, long time to actually understand how to govern yourself. And
and what to do and what
to do, and all you're left with in that space is what you had that you held on to. And for Ireland, especially for a long, long time, it was Catholicism. Because if you were a Catholic, you weren't allowed to practice your religion. You weren't allowed to be educated. You weren't allowed to speak your own language. If you were in court for anything, they didn't have interpreters there who, if you spoke Irish. So you ended up being imprisoned without anybody there to actually speak on your behalf. So we understand colonization here, but it took us a long time, and it's still, we did have a peace accord, thankfully, and violence ceased, but it's still, and your psyche, there's still that colonialist view of things. I think whether we like it or not, and I'm English born, but whether the Irish like it or not, there's still a lot of similarities between the Irish and the English. We tend to like the same things, and I think a lot of it is a throwback from our colonialist past, no matter how much we try to banish it into the past. But what we were left with was Catholicism, and now I suppose we're trying to throw off in this country any remnants of Catholicism, as far as I can see, especially the young. They're trying to make it a more secular society. But for a very long time, like Muslim countries, we had the Catholic Church to fall back on, and that was the one thing that kept us Irish, was our language, our identity, and our religion. And now we're kind of, I feel we're in I feel personally we're in a no man's land, because we're secular, but yet there's so many people still want to hold on to their religion. It's still not fully secular here in this country. Is it the same with you?
I think there are certain countries that are like that, but I think we just need to be more educated about our religion. I think the illiteracy rates in Asia, which is where the predominant Muslims live, is so high. I mean, we have to really focus on human rights and what that means. And even if we do it through the Islamic lens, I think that would be much more fruitful for the countries that, surround us in Asia and Africa. But I mean, going back to looking at, something like the Holocaust, I mean, the Holocaust education is extremely important in the Muslim world. And the reason for that is because of the height of anti-Semitism, right? So, but I also think that not just Holocaust, but also the history of Jews, right? And what they went through for 5,780 years, and how they moved around and what their culture was about is even more important, because you can't define people just because they were persecuted. I think that in terms of the curriculum, we need to do better in terms of educating our kids about each other's culture, history, and not just have our lens. But it doesn't mean, today I was talking to my students about what's going on in this country in terms of racism. And I said, if you really want to be patriotic, which is okay, then be patriotic and accept responsibility for the racism in this country. That's real patriotism.
Yeah.
To say, I'm proud that my nation has accepted this. Germany accepted its responsibility for the Holocaust, for the murders of millions of people. So, I mean, you were saying, that people are pulling down Confederate statues here in the United States.
Yeah.
Because, they want to see the history, the real history of what the Confederacy did to Black Americans. Germany, and I've been all over Germany, has memorialized the history of the Jews.
Yeah.
And made sure that people know where Jews were taken from, and they've taken
That's what I'm talking about, Mehnaz. That's what I'm talking about. I can understand completely the taking down of the want to take down, the want to not have a visual reminder of this person who had so many slaves or who persecuted Black people. But if you were to correlate that with the Holocaust, and you were to try and demolish Auschwitz or demolish Dachau or Mauthausen or Theresienstadt or places like that, what would you have? How would you ever try to combat Holocaust denial if you hadn't got places like this? You have to have those there as a physical reminder of the horrors that happened. They're not nice, but it's what history is made of.
I'm losing you now.
It's not nice, but it's what history is made of. And we have to learn from the past in order to bring that past with us, to ensure that we actually make better choices.
I think you're absolutely right. Can you hear me? Because I lost you. Okay. I think you're absolutely right. But the Confederate statues are celebrating that history. That's the problem. It's not that they're there. It's that they're looking at that is the only history. Brian Stevenson, who is the man who opened the lynching museum in Alabama. I think you know about him. He's amazing. But he says that we have to learn from Germany and say, look, we acknowledge that we lynched, African American. Yeah. And so if we don't have, we have to have all histories side by side, right?
Absolutely.
But when you go to Germany, you don't see Goering statue or Hitler statue or a Nazi flag.
No, but you see Auschwitz and you see Dachau.
But here you see a lot of Confederate flags. You see, pro slavery reminders, and that's the problem. That's the issue. Really.
I think that as you say, they need to be taught in a more holistic manner. The past needs to be taught. People need to be aware that it's almost like the worst thing in the world you can do is to pretend that you don't have that history, to pretend that didn't happen, because it did. But it's to embrace it, if you like, and say, yeah, it happened. We've got to learn from it. I hate to see books being banned, because how else? Bring the book into class, read the book, get people to deconstruct it, get people to give their opinions of it. Why was it of the time? Why was that book of its time? Why isn't it not appropriate now to act in such a way as it was then? What was it about society then that felt it was okay to treat people that way because of the color of their skin? It's not going to happen by burning the book or banning it. It's only going to happen through dialogue.
I agree with you completely, and I think we have at our Manhattan College Library a month of displaying books that have been banned, and we encourage
Excellent.
people to read them. Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it's really amazing to have that.
Because the Nazis did that during World War II. They burned books that they didn't approve of. And, you know, that's like trying to silence somebody that you don't agree with. You feel free to disagree with the books and find them vile and find them objectionable. But discuss, argue, why are they objectionable? Why were they perfectly sensible for people to believe those things at the time? And why are they so abhorrent now? What is it about our society that has changed, or have we changed at all? Or, you know, is it just TV that has made us become more aware? Is it social media? Is it what has made us more socially conscious?
Well, I mean, here's another aspect of banning and not banning. There were a lot of things that were being sold on eBay, Nazi paraphernalia, and people were buying them. So that's one other extreme level, you know, where you have Henry Ford's International Jew that still sells, which is an anti-Semitic text. So you could take that text and read it and critique it.
Yeah,
but most people will probably read that text and say, see, this is what I mean about Jews, right? So there's different levels of looking at how we approach it. And it only is with the critical lens that we can
academically in a classroom where you can have one person saying, yeah, here, this is what he said, and blah, 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 and somebody else saying, but why not? But why do you think that? Or why would you think that that was right? I mean, I looked at Christmas decorations there on eBay there one day. It was on Amazon.com. I was absolutely horrified. They were all swastikas and Hitler paraphernalia. Auschwitz was on one of the Christmas decorations, and rightly it was banned. I was one of the people who objected. I actually sent a letter to Amazon to object and to have it removed. There were thousands and thousands of people objected to it, but it was amazing. They had one with Anne Frank in it, and they had one with Auschwitz, and they had Dachau, and they had all different death camps and transit camps and work camps.
I don't know what people are thinking. No idea.
I have no idea what's going on in people's minds that would think that that was appropriate.
Yeah.
Do you know?
So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of these issues that go on about banning. I mean, there's people who are teaching that are saying they can't prove the Holocaust. I mean, it's a, you know, we can talk about this endlessly, but we have to keep in mind critical thinking and education.
You're writing a book at the moment, and very kindly, I hope to contribute to it, which is, you might tell us about it before we finish.
Yeah, sure. So my friend Mark Slanetnich at
you're after breaking up there again.
Nebraska, and
you're after breaking up there again.
We are. Can you?
You've frozen there.
Let me try. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your friend.
So my friend and my colleague and I are putting this book together that's called International Approaches to the Holocaust. So we want to see what every country is thinking about the Holocaust. How do they teach it? How do they approach it? What stories do they want to bring into the international scene. I think it's so needed. It's so valuable to see the Irish perspective, the Moroccan perspective, the Tunisian perspective, the Canadian, the Australian. So, how do we approach it? What's going on maybe in a government in terms of Hungary or Poland right now? So these are the issues that we're interested in. I hope you will be able to send you a letter for contribution, Mary.
That's fantastic. I'm really excited about that because I have two what would be two chapters that would be absolutely, I think, fit in perfectly about Ireland during what we called the emergency. We didn't call it the World War II at all, or the war. We called it the emergency because we maintained an independence from. We didn't get involved. We didn't allow the British to land or to use any part of Ireland, the southern part of Ireland, and we didn't allow that. Well, we tried to maintain, I suppose, an independence from it. So yeah, I'd be delighted to contribute to it.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be wonderful. And I just want to thank you for your wonderful work and keep going.
No, thank you, and the same to you. And thank you very much, Mehnaz.
Thank you, Mary.
And Slán Leat in Irish, that means God bless, goodbye.
Well, okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Salam.
Salam.
Shalom.
Salam.
Bye-bye.
Shalom.